Welcome back, it's Christine again with the Artist Pod, and today we're going to draw a red carpenter ant. So, let's get arting. Alright, so here's the ant, a little carpenter ant. So carpenter ants, from what I could tell, could be black, they could be red, or they could be both. But some of what makes a carpenter ant is they have sort of this little plate in their middle here. So like fire ants tend to have a really thin, kind of bumpy midsection. Carpenter ants have sort of this thicker line that goes into more of it. Not a ton of detail. Ants are pretty easy to draw. Certainly if you're drawing small ones, it's pretty easy just to do, head, midsection, back, and a bunch of legs. But, if you're drawing a little bigger, it'd be relatively easy to add some details in. So we're going to do it as red. Since I designed on black, it'll be easier to do it as red. And we're just going to get started. Now, it doesn't have fur. It has a little bit of hair, but nothing that we're probably going to draw out. So it's just going to be, sort of longer strokes. It also made me think of like Auntie from Home Alone, the little red ant. Not Home Alone. Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. It was a pretty cute ant. I think we were all devastated at poor Auntie's fate. Now as I do it, I'm following different contours, right? So if I pop off the sketch layer, you can kind of see the contours here. Because their heads do have some contouring. There's, a bulge here that kind of comes down in the middle. And then there's another bulge as it comes down to this little section of its face, and you have the pincers coming up. So I'm indicating all of that by changing the line direction, and then once I start adding the shadows and highlights, that'll indicate it more as well. But the line direction, I'll often change line direction if something is, aimed a little differently in a different way, to indicate that that's something that's it's not going straight, that's not just an even contour, right? Like you can indicate bumps and valleys and things like that. The nice thing about an ant, though, as I sort of mentioned earlier, it doesn't have fur, so I can make the strokes as long as I want. That can save some time. The reason I've been making them so short is along all the details I've been sort of holding back so that I don't miss what I was planning on, and make sure that those details really come through. Because on an ant, you're not going to get a ton, so where you can add details will help in the long run. But now that I'm past some of these details, I can really lengthen out the strokes until we get to the edge of the head, where I'm going to have to bring that back in. It'll make it go a little bit quicker. And like always when I'm on an edge, right, I'm bringing it down and coming in, bringing it down, coming in, and sort of building up the edge this way. Makes it a little easier to keep kind of a straighter edge. And it still will, it won't cause any conflicts with the lines. The exception being, right up at the top where I am coming straight to the edge of that line, and then we'll be bringing that straight down, and that'll avoid any line conflicts. That's one thing you have to worry about. Ants have this, well, I should say carpenter ants seem to have this kind of banding on their backs, but it's like it's just a lighter version of the same kind of color. So for now, all I'm doing is separating the lines out, right? So if I take off that sketch layer, you can kind of still see where it is. And when I'm adding shadows and highlights, I may make this a slightly lighter red to fill in. But otherwise, it's kind of the same thing. I just want to make sure. So I don't actually have to stop the strokes. I am, because that makes it easier to see where the line will be. But I don't have to be as careful on that edge because it doesn't, I don't have to, it's not like it's the edge of the actual ant itself. So a stray line going too far won't necessarily affect the composition. All right, now I don't do this often, but I did kind of with the ant in that as I was doing the initial sketch, I also just went ahead and added the shadows, right? So I added enough lines together for this to be shadow-like. I'm just refining around the eyes before I turn those red too. Making the last revisions I need without the sketch in place. Sketch is great, incredibly useful, but it does block a little bit of the actual finished drawing, and so I can't always line things up right until after that's off. So yeah, I'm just making sure all these little pieces are filled in, make sense, good to go. Now, I'm going to have the light source coming from over here. And I know I say above and in front of always, so it's not coming right from the side, right? It's coming from, kind of this angle to it. So, just going to get started adding that kind of full pin pressure. All edges are in shadow, right? So even this edge over here. And of course you have this nice big head. Not a lot regarding shadows and highlights. For the most part, it's going to be pretty straightforward. We have some highlight over here to the edge. As it comes this way, it's going to go a little bit more into shadow because it's turning a little bit away from that source. Comes over, backing that off. Gonna have, pincers will be picking up just a little bit, but we'll also have some shadowing. Same on this side. Gonna be just that little bit on that inside line. And we're gonna give a little bit to the eyes too, as their own separate sort of bulge. Now for small, little things like this, it's actually really easy to do, especially because I've already added the shadows in, so it's just a matter of putting a burst of highlight in the middle, preferably on the side of the light source, although sometimes there's not a lot of space to work with. Doesn't quite get as nicely as you want, but it'll still translate pretty nicely. Gives it sort of this rounded look. Now usually, especially with the light source coming from the right, the legs would be in shadow on this side. The reason it's in highlight is it's coming up, right? So it's coming up, catching the light and going back down. Whereas on this one, it's going to catch the light, but after, the body, sort of after it clears the body. And that's kind of what's happening over here and why this wasn't immediately in shadow. And I fix some of that. So with its legs raised, and this one is going to be raised as well. Give that a little bit of a gap where it's going to be down below, and then the raised part of the leg. Again, now this one, these two are raised, this one's lowered, so body would be blocking, and then you'll have a little bit kicking in after you get past that point. Now, I'm going to add just that slightly lighter color for both this section up here and his little rings on his abdomen. And I'm just right now taking a slightly lighter color, and you can see, right, if I take that off versus when I have it back on, giving it a little bit of burst where the light might be catching to add some extra depth. Ants sometimes, like other insects, are seem a little shinier to me. So it's not much. I'm not putting full pin pressure. This is very light strokes. Just a light color. The side where the light source would be hitting in spots where you basically have an extreme highlight on him. And it'll add that little bit of depth. But you don't cover the whole spot, right? So in this case, for instance, on the abdomen, I'm going to do this section here, kind of this circular spot where you have the bulge in the abdomen, and then taper it off. Just gives it a little bit more depth. I can do the same thing on some of these, just with like single little tiny line. All right, and there we go. All right, so that is how you draw a carpenter ant. I hope that was helpful. In the floating nether next to me, I have other videos of art tutorials I have done, and I will see you all soon. Thank you so much. Take care.